So let's play e4. That is the move that most people actually play. And e5. So knight f3. And I unfortunately, I can't satisfy everybody in terms of like the opening that we play. I know people play different stuff. Trust me, I know that. But I like to showcase different openings and how to play them. And an opening that I've wanted to play today is the Scotch. Yeah, I do give priority to subs. And the Scotch is the move d4 in this position. Now, the Scotch is an opening that I do recommend to beginners. Among the openings I recommend. That's not the only one. Because the Scotch, in the words of my friend Peter, who streams at the head of the Charlotte Chess Center, who streams at Charlotte Chess Center, because he's asleep, I will allow myself to say something nice about him, which normally isn't the case when he's in the stream. Check out his stream. He does instructional streams twice a week, and they're really good. So give him a follow. Trust me, if you're interested in chess improvement, it is definitely worth it. I don't put my name behind a lot of people, but he's great at explaining concepts and stuff. So supporting, by a follow, he would really appreciate. But essentially, the Scotch teaches you to play with all of your pieces. Because what the move d4 does is it opens up the center. And think of it this way. When the center is closed, you kind of have a crutch. It's important to know how to play when the center is closed. When the center is closed, there's less likelihood of blundering pieces. There is less, let's just say, head-to-head combat between the pieces. When the center is open, it teaches you the importance of having all of your pieces on good squares. It teaches you the importance of active development, and it allows you basically you get punished for your mistakes, which when you're a beginner is kind of important. So d6 is kind of passive. That's not a terrible move, but what makes this move passive? Who can explain to me why this is a passive move? The reason is quite simple. Because the good thing about this move is it opens up one bishop, but in opening up one bishop, it blocks the other. You got to be careful about that. It blocks the dark squared bishop, so now it can only come to e7, which is not the sexiest square. It's a serviceable square. It's not terrible, which is why this move is not terrible, but it's not, 10 out of 10 kind of square. 10 out of 10 square would be bishop c5, which is one of the main moves, or knight to f6, which is the other. What should we do? Well, let's just develop our knight. No rocket science here. And now we need to develop our bishops. Now, where would this bishop go? Where do you guys propose? Assuming that he develops his knight, which I think he will. But even if he doesn't, in general, where should this bishop go? Yeah, so there's two squares that you guys should be considering, and that's the squares b5 and c4. So I like the move bishop b5 less. And I know that this will be surprising to a lot of people because people really like pins, and you should like pins. But not all pins are effective. And the problem with bishop to b5 is that he's going to unpin himself with bishop to d7. And that pin is going to be kind of empty, right? There's going to be no more pin. And that bishop on b5 is going to be sort of staring at the knight. And a trade is not particularly good. Instead, let's drop our bishop on c4. And this bishop is quite a bit better because it has the sustained pressure that it's mounting on the f7 pawn. Now, again, chess is a gradual game. You're not going to checkmate anybody with one developing move. So it's not like we are threatening to take the pawn on f7. We are applying long-term pressure on it. We are basically setting up for a potential attack, which may involve this bishop. It's controlling a lot of squares. And he goes g6 to fianchetto his bishop. Now let's consider this bishop. Where should this bishop go? Where should this bishop go? Oh, we have an even sexier move, though. Okay, but this is kind of advanced, but it's really cool. You guys want me to do it? Want me to walk you through the logic? Now, the development move would be bishop to g5, but let me try to explain how I see this rather than just playing the moves. Do you guys see the position of the queens? In the starting position, the queens are, and I call this a standoff. A standoff is when two pieces are facing each other, but there's more than one piece blocking them. If there's only one piece blocking them and it's your piece, it's an x-ray. Now, when the two pieces are at a standoff, there is a tactical potential if the position opens up. If the pieces between them somehow disappear, then the pieces are going to be directly facing each other. So I notice that the queens are in a standoff. Not only are the queens in a standoff, but black's queen is defended by two pieces. It is defended, first of all, by the knight, and second of all, by the king. Hypothetically, how can I get this king out of e8? Can I decoy this king from its defense of the d8 queen, of the queen? Yeah, bishop f7, but not immediately. If a situation arises where the queens are staring at each other, I could do that. Can I get the knight out of c6? So I need two more things. I need to get the knight out of c6. Let's take it. And there's only one thing preventing me from being able to take on f7, and that is the d6 pawn. And to the rescue comes another decoy sacrifice, where we play knight, where we play the move e5, attacking the knight, and if he doesn't take our pawn, then this pawn is going to wreak havoc. If he does, then we play bishop captures f7, and he doesn't, and we'll talk about this, distracting the king from the queen. He didn't have to take the bishop there, but his position would have been ruined regardless. Okay, so Abraham goes d5, counterattacking our bishop. Now, should we take the knight? And those of you who are often in my stream know that when I ask that question, actually we have a better move, and Tobias found it. So we can. In general, we should, because that opens up the position. But let's put it this way. We have a better way of taking that knight. The better way of taking that knight, good job, Tobias, is the move bishop g5. So conceptually, we should take the knight, but we should do it with the bishop, which would fork. If he takes our bishop, then we can actually take his knight immediately, but we can also take his queen first. And then that bishop is going to be forking the rook and the queen, or the rook and the king. But in general, the reason that we should take the knight, when our opponent is less developed than we are, and here, he's got both of his bishops undeveloped, and he's not even close to castling. The side that is the furthest away from castling is the side that often stands to lose when the center is opened. Why? Because when the center is opened, that e-file can often be used to check an exposed king. Bishop to e7. What should we take the knight with? Remember, our bishop is hanging. We got to be careful. What should we take the knight with? We should take the knight with a pawn. If we take the knight with a bishop, he takes our bishop. And then he takes the other bishop, and material is equal. If we take with a pawn, then he can at most only get a pawn for the bishop. If he takes the bishop, then we're going to take his bishop, and we are going to remain up a piece. So, yeah. Okay, now we should trade. And now we need to move our bishop away. After he takes with the queen, we need to move our bishop away from c4 because it was getting attacked. Where should we move it? It doesn't really matter. This is a less essential decision. Let's just drop it out to d3. So it's sort of in the vicinity of the king in case he castled. And of course, we also need to castle. Castle, castle. And we are up a piece. Now is the conversion stage. We are converting our advantage, and being up a piece is, in sort of grandmaster terms, a decisive advantage. Now, as I've explained during my initial speedrun, there are two fundamental methods, overarching methods of converting an extra piece or more. The first is to trade as many pieces as possible. What you're essentially aiming for in the end is getting a situation where you just have your extra piece and a bunch of pawns against your opponent's king and a bunch of pawns. That makes it easier because then that extra piece is just going to have target practice against the pawns, and that's going to be easier to win. The second method is to use your extra piece as kind of another soccer player and mount an attack against the opposing king, which by definition is going to be good because you have more pieces in the attack. You literally have more pieces. Here, we can try to apply either method. We can play queen to c1. We can play queen to c1 and threaten the queen trade, or we can try to open up the king. Now, the method that is usually taught by coaches is the trade method. But I actually want to push back on that slightly. What often happens to players is they try too hard to trade all of the pieces. And in doing so, they forget that they make a mistake. Here, we're actually going to attack Black's king. Now, to attack Black's king, we need to open up some files around it. And so the move f4, followed by f5, trying to open that f file, which would offer us an avenue to Black's king, that seems to me to be the best move. Sorry, that was a long explanation. My bad. But hopefully that makes sense. Just remember that trading pieces is not the only way of converting an advantage. Trying to attack your opponent's king is also a full-fledged alternative method of converting many positions. Oftentimes it's better. It's just quicker and it's more effective. And f5. We shove this pawn to f5. We sacrifice it. Take my pawn, by all means. If he takes it with his pawn, he ruins the pawn structure around his king. If he takes it with a bishop, then we take his bishop. And once again, he's going to end up having to take with a pawn. If he doesn't take with a pawn, okay, now he's making a weakness. Now we need to apply something I taught you guys a little bit earlier. We ask, after an important move like this, how has the position changed? What squares are now available to some of our pieces? And if we look very carefully, the move g5 opens up the h5 square for our queen, which is a great attacking position. I'm going to have to play a little bit faster just because I don't have much time. Okay, so bishop takes f5 is a blunder, but black is kind of losing anyway. Now we have 2 attackers on that square and only 1 defender. Let's take with a rook. We take with a rook to involve the rook in the attack, although we could have taken with the bishop. And the game is over. We're up 2 pieces and we're checkmating him. Check. That is not a scary check. Not all checks are scary. We just tuck the king away in the corner. Our king is perfectly safe. And we are up 2 pieces, and we're going to use them to deliver checkmate. But we can do it in a nice way. So what do I see here? Boom and boom. The bishop and the queen are both aimed at the h7 pawn. Where should we take that logic? Well, we take that logic and we transform it into a move by saying, well, if the rook was gone from f5, then queen takes h7 would be checkmate, right? Because it just would. So we need to move the rook away. Now, do we just put it on any square? No. The ideal kind of move is to move the rook away with check. He has to respond to the check, and so then we deliver checkmate. Yeah. Now, the second best move would be to move the rook away and attack the queen simultaneously. That would be second best because technically he could give up the queen. Rook takes g5 is literally forced checkmate. He has to either take the rook or move the king away because he is in check. And then queen takes h7 is going to be mate. Yeah, good game. Good game, Abraham. And another very instructive game. Okay. So, good game, good game. That was the most, well, thank you for playing. I know I realize it's nerve-wracking to play in front of, thousands of people, literally, but you played well. So, you made for an instructive opponent, yes. So, d4 is the Scotch. And the Scotch is named the Scotch. I actually think it is named after Scotland. Obviously, but sometimes openings have weird names that aren't necessarily named after like the first person to play the opening. But the city of Edinburgh in Scotland was one of the first, what used to be popular in the 1800s is 2 cities. The chess clubs of 2 cities would basically play a correspondence game against each other. They would like mail each other moves. Like the members of each chess club would together come up with the moves. And so the city of Edinburgh faced off against the city of London in 1824, and they were among the first. The members of the club were among the first to play the Scotch. But a couple people had played the Scotch before. Now, here's the cool thing. I'm going to blow your mind. I will preface this by saying that the veracity of this game is disputed. Like, whether this game actually happened is subject to debate. I read about this. But do you guys know, according to my database, who the first person to play the Scotch was in the year 1818? It's pretty mind-blowing. Nobody is expecting me, unless somebody knows this, to say this name. Napoleon. Yes, you guys know. Napoleon. Napoleon Bonaparte, who was an avid chess player. That part is not disputed, and that's not surprising. But according to my database, in 1818, he played a game against General Bertrand, already while he was banished to St. Helena. But I read about this, and apparently there's a very famous chess historian, Edward Winter, who claims that these games didn't actually happen. It was just sort of made up to, to add to the legend of Napoleon. But if the game did happen, then he was the first person to play the Scotch, according to historical record. And, yeah, but anyways, it was played a couple times before the city of Edinburgh played it. And the Scotch is a very sound opening because it opens up the diagonal for the bishop and it opens up the center. It's played by a lot of grandmasters. I played the Scotch as my main opening until I was about 1700 or 1800. Then I switched to the Ruy Lopez. So the move d6, I already explained why it's not the best, because it blocks the bishop. So I would, you know, encourage bishop c5. That's one of the main moves. That's what Charlie played against XQC. The Charlie XQC game was a Scotch. XQC played c3. Charlie deployed his queen to f6. He just lost. Whoa, it's exactly what we practiced for. Exactly what we practiced for. Yeah, so Charlie made it in with queen takes f2. And that was the Scotch. That doesn't mean the Scotch is a bad opening. I don't know if XQC is ever going to play it again. But in this position, bishop e3 is the best move. That's actually theory. And I love that video too, trust me. And I think so does Charlie. Most people love that video. I think I'm responsible for like a couple thousand of its millions of views. Anyways. So bishop c5 is possible, and you know, Hikaru didn't like the variational approach, and I think knight f6 is also possible here. This is a more, let's just say, classical move because you develop the knight before the bishop, but from a theoretical perspective, the moves are equivalent. The moves are equivalent in strength. All right. Yeah, if knight takes c6, then black can play queen f6 anyway. Black can play queen f6 anyway. And this is an intermediate move. It threatens checkmate. White has to attend to the checkmate, and then black recaptures the knight. Okay. So d6, knight c3, we develop our pieces, and g6 is a big mistake. The reason g6 is a mistake is because black cannot afford, Abraham, in this position, the thing is you can't afford to take two moves to develop your bishop. You know that now. But bishop e7 would be the best move. I get that the bishop is passive here, but this is better than, you know, than developing slowly, because at least you get to castle. And black is slightly worse. White has better development here, but at least black is solid. It's a solid position. It's not easy for white to win the game fast. Okay. So g6, and now I explained fully the logic behind this move. Knight takes c6 and e5. Now let's take a look at what happens if d takes e5. So as I explained, we play bishop takes f7. And if king takes f7, then queen takes d8. There is one very important detail in this position. Sometimes allowing this is actually fine for black. You guys, what? Losing the queen like that is fine for black. Well, there is an opening called the Danish Gambit. The Danish Gambit is where you sacrifice a bunch of pawns in the opening. I'm going to skip forward to the important part. So this position frequently occurs in the Danish Gambit, and here black has the move knight f6. Why does this look like a big mistake? Who can tell me? This looks like exactly the kind of moment we just had. But wait a second, right? Bishop f7. And if king f7, then you lose your queen. But wait a second. This isn't the same as this. What's the key difference? There's several superficial differences. The key difference is the positioning of this knight on c3. The knight being on c3, here the knight is on b1. The knight being on b1 allows bishop b4 check. This wins back the queen. White has to drop the queen back to avoid losing it entirely. At least white gets the piece back for it. And this is a very famous endgame. It's about equal. Material is now equal as a result. So black can actually fall into this deliberately and win back the queen. But with the knight being on c3, none of this works. Bishop b4 is no longer a check. You can still play bishop b4, but it loses all of its effectiveness. It just drops the rook. So part of the reason that chess gets complicated is because a lot of chess mastery consists in perceiving these very small details. It's very important to be detail-oriented. It's very important to compare various positions, because eventually you get better at spotting these kinds of things. Okay. So, can't hide the queen. Yeah. So e5, d5. Yeah, and in this position, black should move the king up in order to not lose the queen. But I can even still take the queen, and look at how horrible black's pawns are, and the king is exposed. I can pin the knight. White is just much better here. So that's just good for white. And so Abraham played d5. We go bishop g5. And if pawn takes bishop, then of course we can take the queen and take the knight, and this is a fork. And it's a devastating fork because the king has to move, or bishop blocks, and then we take the rook. Okay. Yeah, I'm off the cam here. Okay. Sorry, I was leaning back in my chair. Let me move up again. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Bishop e7, we win the piece. Trade, bishop back, castle, castle, and now f4, opening up the f-file. f5, forcing a weakness. Queen h5, exploiting that weakness. Okay, so how would we have attacked if black just, let's say, developed the bishop? This pawn on g5 prevents a very sexy rook lift from happening. We can still lift the rook up to f3 and h3, but we can also make the very typical move h4. When you're attacking, you want to open up the position of your opponent's king. And a good way to do that would be h4. If he takes, then we can drop the rook to f4 and then either give a check or take on h4. And in either case, the attack is absolutely devastating because the moment that the queen moves, we can now open up the bishop with f6. And the attack is just absolutely crushing here. So there's really nothing to even discuss here, but Abraham takes an f5. This hastens the defeat. I mean, although, yeah, the position is tough even without it. And now rook takes g5 is a simple discovery, and queen takes h7 is checkmate. So short but sweet, and again, thanks for putting yourself out there. That was a very instructive game. I really appreciate it, Abraham.